What's going on, guys? Welcome to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players, by players, and all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined by my bud from across the ocean, Hayden Dale. And to start off, Hayden, let's get the lore on Hayden Dale. Tell us how you got into flesh and blood, tell us where you started, and just give us your history.
What's going on, Brendan? Yeah, sure. So I've been playing Flesh and Blood since basically the game came out in late 2019. Very fortunate to jump into the game early here in Australia. Probably what attracted me to the game, to be honest, was just the way the game plays out. A long-time Magic the Gathering player. Obviously get frustrated sometimes with mana screw and mana flood and lands and variance and that sort of thing. So, the way Flesh and Blood is a bit more, I guess, less variance involved, a bit more strategic. Was super awesome to me, and I know for me, Brute, I saw the Brute class, was super into that, so that's how I kind of got into Flesh and Blood, and haven't really looked back since. I love the game, I love talking about the game, obviously writing content about the game as much as possible. And what about yourself, Brendan? How did you get into the game, and what sort of kept you playing?
First of all, I love how Hayden introduced himself and didn't mention he was a calling champion in a limited event in Australia. So, I also started back in late 2019. I originally competed in the Calling Austin Limited. Before then, I really hadn't played TCGs. I'd maybe played some F&M and stuff like that. But I had actually been following the game before, and I was one of Sasha Markovitz's 20 Twitter followers. So day one when I walked in, I introduced myself, and we kind of just became best friends after that. There isn't much to the stories. I lost. I got second place, but then I just kind of followed this crazy, rabbit hole of Fab where I ended up traveling to New Zealand for the Calling Auckland Constructed, testing with Sasha before, and the deck that we had created for that event actually won, and it was just an interesting event for me because I hadn't, I kind of first TCG, first experience with all that, and after that I was just hooked. I stayed with it and played as much as I could during COVID, and just been basically grinding out the game for almost over a year now, so a while. But not as exciting as a calling, not as exciting as a calling champion. Well, but
you could have had it, but maybe tell everyone, Brendan, who did you lose that final to?
Yeah, so I lost the final in Austin to Sasha Markovic, and then I also got knocked out of top 8 in the Calling Austin to Sasha Markovic as well. So he got in on breakers and I didn't. So
in Auckland, right?
Yeah, in Auckland.
Yeah. Traveled all the way down under, all the way to New Zealand, just to be knocked out by your testing partner for top 8. It's a bit tough.
Yeah, I look at it as like a form of charity. Like he needs to, he needs some wins in his life. So I just gave him those two back-to-back champ.
Brendan is known as being very generous, that's for sure.
For sure. Yeah, but enough of that. It's time for a bit of news and around the world of race. So from the Savage Lands to Metrics, let's recap on what's been happening in Flesh and Blood the past week.
Yeah, let's do it. So obviously big news this week. We're in the first week of Monarch preview season, and it's kicked off with a bit of a bang, to be honest. I mean, we've already seen, we're recording on Friday morning, Australian time, Thursday night, Brendan's time. So we've seen 21 cards already. Across generics, light class. We've seen about the shadow class. We've seen the first new hero, Shadow Brute. We've also now know that there's going to be a Shadow Runeblade hero. So it's already underway. Pre-release is 2 weeks away now, the 30th of April, and then release on the 7th. So a lot happening around preview season for Monarch, and still more to come. Presumably next week we're going to see more heroes, and today I think probably around the time that this podcast actually drops, we're probably going to see the Runeblade hero, right, Brendan?
Yep, absolutely. I think that's what we expect. So should be interesting. And just quickly before we get into the main topic of the podcast, just some quick announcements. From my end, we are actually running. So I run a tournament called Fab Gauntlet through the Discord, and we moved our dates to Saturday. So Sunday for Australia and New Zealand. So 8 p.m. EST. Saturday, and we actually have a spoiler on the stream this week, so that should be exciting. Pretty good one. So Shadow Runeblade as well, and then actually on Sunday, so Monday for New Zealand, Australia, I have a very, very, very interesting spoiler for the main Discord. So the Flesh and Blood TCG community Discord, which I run with the help of my mod team We have a really, really, really cool spoiler. I can't say that enough because I can probably tell you the name because it's been mentioned on another card, but it's going to be Blasphemet. So mentioned on the Doomsday. So the token, what does it do? Does it replace your hero? Like, what is, tune in to find out, right?
That's awesome. Yeah, there's been so much speculation about what Blasphemous and Ursa might be. As you say, do they replace heroes? Are they are they weapon tokens? Like what exactly are they? So I'm super excited to see that. I can't. I have to wait though 3 days, and I get to see it. So I've got my sort of my speculation, but we'll see what happens, right? Yeah, so main topic of the pod this week, we're actually talking about the preview cards we've seen so far. So for the next 3 weeks leading up to the previous season, myself and Brendan are going to just recap each week sort of what we're seeing come out of previews, what we think of these cards, the impact they might have on both constructed and limited formats, and just overall, the level we think these cards are at and what might be next. So today we're going to talk through what we've seen so far from generic side, from the shadow side, from the brute class as well. And then next week, I think we'll probably be jumping into light. Feels like we're going to get some more light preview spoiler cards next week. So Brendan, where are we starting with the main topic of the pod? Which cards are we starting with?
Yeah, so the first card here is going to be Surging Militia, a red, so it pitches for 1 and costs 2. It's a generic action attack. It swings for 5 and blocks for 2, and it's a common. And Surging Militia reads, Surging Militia has +1 attack for each non-equipment card defending it. What do you think about this card, Hayden?
Yeah, I think this card has probably most impact in the limited format. As a sort of late game finisher. I think about the red card. To defend this card out and all its damage, you're going to need to defend with 3 cards. If you've got 3 defense, so say an opponent chucks this down, you want to defend it out, you throw down 2 cards that defend for 3. It's now coming in for 7, right? So it's going to leak a damage. And for that reason, I think it's quite a good way to force the cards out of hands late game when life totals are low, or actually push damage over towards that end game. So for that reason as well, I really like the yellow and the blue. Blue will have 3 attacks, so can get to 4 with 1 card defending it. So to actually keep that damage out requires 2. So yeah, I think this is going to be quite a just a solid staple card in the limited format. I'm not sure about in constructed whether this would see much play. Yeah, Brendan?
Yeah, so I also agree with you that I'm in the limited format. I'm more up on the blue and the yellow than I am with the red. And I think that the power level of this card is important in the context of the entire set. So if we look at a set like Welcome to Wraith, a lot of cards block for 3. If we look at a set like Arcane Rising, a lot of cards block for 2. And you'd probably be able to evaluate the strength of the red and the yellow better if you knew the entire context of what the cards in the set were blocking for. So I think kind of a safe bet right now is the blue is going to be very good. As it's blocked with 1 card, it will leak 1 damage. And then we'll need more context to kind of evaluate red and yellow.
Yep. I think it comes down to weapon cost as well, right? One of the things we saw in Welcome to Wraith, for instance, is how good yellow cards are in Brute because of the club's weapon cost, right? So maybe it could be the same for Surging Militia. We have seen some of the weapons already. We know there's a 2-cost weapon in there. Could be similar. I guess we'll have to wait and see till the full set sort of comes out. So the next card we want to look at is Memorial Ground. So Memorial Ground is a instant, cost 0. So the one we've seen is a red card, pitches for 1. But we also know it's a cycle because it is that common, so there's going to be a yellow and a blue. And Memorial Ground says, put target attack action card with cost 2 or less from your graveyard on top of your deck. So that's the red. So the yellow will say 1 or less, and the blue will say 0 or less. What do you think about this card, Brennan?
Yeah, I think that, after seeing weapons already spoiled in this set, in limited, the blocking for 0 will likely have a significant cost. But that said, the effect is powerful, right? Being able to play a impactful card against your opponent and then put it back on top of your deck for the next turn. What are your initial thoughts, and what do you think the cost of maybe having multiple of these in your deck at the same time? We've seen Shadow Brute, and maybe it's a class where when you're playing against them, you're going to want to have cards that block and not instants, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in the limited format, there's 100% a cost to how many cards you're going to be playing that don't defend, and you have to be really mindful of that, right? So there's only going to be so many that you can play. I think there's 2 things to this. So in the limited context, there's a few things I like about this card. The fact that part of this format we've already seen is filling up your graveyard to pay for the banish cost on the brute cards, so banish 3 cards. And, there might be cards that you want to get back. So Memorial Ground can let you get back powerful cards on top of the deck. It does cost you a card, but it could be a good setup. It also, because we're going through the deck so quickly, presumably, you're really using that deck as a resource. This actually lets you get a card, back, and a card that's worthwhile, right? So you're basically trading this card for another card that's a bit more impactful. The other thing I like about Unlimited is that it can help trigger effects, like the Brute, draw a card and discard a card. You can set up to make sure that you definitely hit that. So Deadwood Rumbler, for instance. And then I actually think that bleeds over into Constructed a little bit. There could be a space for this card in Constructed where, you want to set up cards like Shadow of the Blasphemous. You want to set up cards that have 6 attack to draw. Or I know people have talked about Azalea. You set up the top card of the deck with Azalea, put like a red and a ledger back on top. And it lets you just kind of have a 4th copy, right, of effectively that card. I'm not sold that I think it's going to be, auto includes and Azalea and things like that. I don't actually think it's going to be that great. I think the better way to do that sort of thing is to actually just set up your pitch and set up your deck. But this is maybe a little bit of a cheat card. So yeah, interested to see what sort of play it sees.
Great. And moving on to the next card, we have Rally the Rearguard. It's a 2-cost red that attacks for 6 and blocks for 2 at common. And Rally the Rearguard reads, once per turn instant. Discard a card, Rally the Rearguard gains +3 defense. Activate this ability only while Rally the Rearguard is defending. So yeah, I mean, my first thought to this card is that it's going to be extremely powerful and limited, especially for that defense value. Also, swinging for 6, this is likely going to go into your Shadow Brute decks, and maybe we do see some constructed play out of it. What are your first thoughts, Hayden?
Yeah, I think this is going to be like a limited staple. I think you're going to want to get a number of these cards. I think it's going to be actually, like, in draft context, a really high pick. We've already seen so many cards that don't defend, and a way to turn those into defending cards potentially is a card like this. So, defense step, play down Rally the Rearguard to defend, and then, discard one of these instants to give it +3 and block out an attack for 5 or whatever it might be. I think it's going to be hugely important.
And although we haven't had any attack reaction spoiled yet, theoretically in the context of cards like Razor Reflex and even Pummel, if you blue or yellow, this card is quite good because at instant speed you're able to bump that defense value and dodge the on-hit triggers.
I don't see it as much in Constructed, I don't think. I mean, a 2-cost 6 attack, maybe some Brute decks are going to try and fit that in for the red version. But yeah, I don't really see it. I think this is going to be a limited staple though. Cool.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to move through onto the Shadow class now. The Shadow talent. So we know Shadow is a talent of the set, not a class, but we do have the classes that then go into Shadow, which we now know is for the set is Brute and Runeblade. So let's look at the Shadow cards so far. So let's start with Lunatide Plunderer. So Lunatide Plunderer is a attack action. We've got the red card here, so costs 3 for a red, has 7 attack and 2 defense. And Lunatide Plunderer says, if it hits a hero, banish it and up to 1 card from their soul. So initial thoughts, I guess, is if playing this into a light hero, you get an extra bonus effect where you can actually disrupt their game plan. You can take away some of their soul, which they're going to be trying to stack up to pay for some of their cards. What do you think about this card, Brennan, overall?
Yeah, it's a highly contextual card because it interacts with the soul, but let's say you are going up against another shadow, a shadow hero unlimited. I think that this card still is an include, especially in your sealed deck. Being able to swing for 7, although the block value for 2 is not so good. The vanilla stats of this card are not too bad, so I think it's pretty medium and can kind of go in most decks as filler.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of passes that like vanilla test, right? Like it's 3 for 7 at red. The Brute deck's probably going to want to chuck a couple of these in yellow and red because it has more than 6 attack, sort of fulfills that requirement. And then that on-hit effect is just like, sort of added gravy against the light class, which I think it's pretty important. Into that light talent. So we'll have to see. But I think, did you see any sort of application for, constructed formats of this card?
Not to come immediately come to mind, but one thing I'm thinking about when I see this card is like, what is the draft format going to look like for Monarch? I mean, you're going to have like a significant amount of these cards in your sideboard, ideally. So when you do go up the light heroes, obviously there are some cards that have been spoiled in this set that are completely useless against a Shadow Mirror, and are only going to be sideboard in for light heroes. But is this one of those cards where you might have a few of these in the sideboard and bring them in when you do face up against that light hero? We'll just have to see how significant banishing a card from the soul is going to be.
True. You're not super excited to just play Eclipse Existence into to every hero.
Yeah, I mean, I remember we were talking about it because you're like, "Oh, it only does this." No, it literally does nothing against another Shadow.
I look like an idiot, clearly.
All right, now on to the next card. It's going to be Ghostly Visit. It's a red that costs 1 at common, so going to be an entire cycle there, and it attacks for 4 and blocks for 3. So automatically passing kind of the vanilla test that we want to see out of a 1 cost. But Ghostly Visit reads: you may play Ghostly Visit from your banished zone, and then it says Blood Debt. And for the first time that we read it, so at the beginning of this is what Blood Debt is. At the beginning of your end phase, if Ghostly Visit is in your banished zone, lose 1 life. So what do you think about this, Hayden? And expand a little bit more on Blood Debt and kind of what that mechanic is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, this is we saw a few cards spoiled with Blood Debt. We knew what Blood Debt was, so the fact that if it's in your banish, you have to pay, you lose a life at the end phase for every turn for each Blood Debt card. So that's really going to stack up as the first thing, right? Is that you start to get 4 or 5 Blood Debt cards in there. How are you going to suppress that? Otherwise, you're going to die pretty quickly, right? Obviously, we know with Levia, the new brute hero, that they suppress Blood Debt if you've banished a card with 6 or more attack this turn. So you keep feeding that banish, but if you keep feeding it 6 attacks, you get to suppress the Blood Debt. I think this is the first card we saw that you could play from Banish Zone. Maybe we saw the Tome actually first, but the first attack action that you could play from Banish, which I think is super, super relevant, right? So, you get this into your Banish either from randomly getting it from Graveyard into Banish, or you banishing the card itself, but then you actually get to play it. So it's an attack effect that doesn't cost you a card, right? So you get to play this from Banish with no need to use a card from hand apart from paying that 1 resource, which I think is super important. I think that's obviously the biggest strength of being able to play from the Banish Zone, is that it's effectively extra cards in your hand. Do you think, I'm not sure which formats this might be relevant for. My initial thought is this is going to be limited mostly, but there could be some constructed application to this card as well, potentially.
Yeah, it depends on the number of cards we have with Blood Debt, right, and how hard it's going to be to meet some of the criteria to cast a card like Eclipse, where you have to, meet those effects, right? So we'll have to see when Runeblade gets completely spoiled, but immediately what I think is limited, right? 1 for 4, blocks for 3, can be played from your Banished Zone, so it can be played multiple times throughout the game. I think this is going to be, especially the red one, is going to be a great thing to open in your sealed pool, and probably an early pick in draft if you decide to go Shadow. Yeah,
it's a repeatable effect, right? Like, I actually think this could see some play in these. I mean, we haven't seen the Shadow Runeblade hero yet. We don't know the extent, but just the framework of this card and what it kind of offers you makes me think that it might be a home for it in one of these Shadow Runeblade, either Blitz or Constructed decks or whatever it might be, because it just is a repeatable effect and it doesn't cost you a card from hand. So, I know, let's just take a few cards, for example, right? Like, if you have a couple of Runeblade attack actions, you've got ways to give it go again, or whether they have natural go again, like Rune Flash, or you've got Mover in Skies, or whatever it might be. And then you just have 1 resource left after the go again. You just get to chuck this from your banish. It's not an extra card that you have to have ready to go. I just think that's quite a powerful, or it has a lot of upside. And I think, that repeatable effect could be something we see.
Yeah, I think we're early days in looking at the kind of Banished Zone and Blood Debt and all this, but it makes me wonder what Fatigue will look like in this format, especially in Sealed. Like, how often are you going to be able to cast this card? Because ideally, when you cast this card, you're going to be taking 1 card out of the opponent's hand, and potentially deck, right? We don't know how often they'll be shuffling their graveyard into their Banished Zone and playing that against you. But I mean, say you get this off 3 times in a game, it's quite huge, right?
Are you trying to draw parallels to Drone? Is this Monarch's Drone? Is that what you're trying to say?
So yeah, is this going to be the Drone of Brutality in this set? Obviously, Drone of Brutality was a bit easier in terms of its conditions, right? It went into the deck no matter what. There was no Blood Debt cost, and it was always going to be there at the end of the game. Theoretically, with keeping this in your Banished Zone, it's going to be taking a life away from you each turn, so there is a cost there. But yeah, I mean, who knows how it will warp the format in terms of being able to play some of these cards like Ghostly Visit maybe 2-3 times in a game.
Yeah, definitely. So Tome of Torment, next card. So this is Tome of Torment's Majestic. The Shadow action. Cost 0. It's in red. And Tome of Torment says you may play Tome of Torment from your banish zone, draw a card. And it has Blood Debt as well. So another card with Blood Debt here. This is an interesting card. I mean, face value, I'm not sure what to think of this card. I mean, a 0 cost action, so it doesn't, as an action, doesn't have go again. In red, doesn't defend actually as well, is huge to say. So there's no defense value on this card. Draw a card. I'm a little bit unsure until we see more of the set why this card might be good. Unless you have any thoughts, Brendan?
Yeah, like you said, this card is massively contextual on the Runeblade class. Or, I mean, not totally the Runeblade class, but I would like to see more of the Runeblade before we can evaluate this card. Yeah, right. Because without having go again, it seems a bit underwhelming. But we do know that Shadow Runeblade is going to be wanting to put cards in that Blood Debt zone to summon Blasphemet. This is speaking from a constructed standpoint. Yeah, so I mean, it's just weird thinking about this in the context of other tomes that are already in, like Organian Tome of the Arknight. Seems a bit underwhelming at first glance, but I'm sure that there are a lot more cards that make this make more sense, right?
Reasons, right? I think one thing, I guess, is so this can be a Blood Debt trigger for your cards that require certain Blood Debt thresholds. So like we've seen, obviously, Eclipse and Doomsday. So one requiring you to play a certain amount of Blood Debt cards in a turn to fulfill the effect. It might be hard when this doesn't have go again, but does draw a card, so if it could get go again somehow, it could be relevant. But the other one is just having Blood Debt cards in there for Doomsday. Mm-hmm. So then, you fulfill that effect, but then you get to get them out. You want to get them out to not lose the game, right? Not lose all your life. So potentially this is a card that you can then get out and not have to pay that life. And actually one thing I guess about this is it does have a little bit of utility, and that if this is sitting in your banish zone fulfilling Blood Debt requirements, if you have to defend out with your whole hand on a turn, your turn could literally just be play this from banish, draw a card, have an arsenal card to set. So it's not completely useless. So it's just interesting to see how it plays out though.
Yeah. And so our next card's going to be Eclipse Existence, a blue 0 cost. That's a shadow instant at common. It says, whenever an attack you control hits a light hero this turn, you may banish a card from their soul. If you do, they lose 1 life. If you have more life than opposing light hero, you may banish an action card from your graveyard. What do you think, Hayden?
Yeah, I mean, we just talked about this before, right? Like, it's a purely, I guess, sideboard card for into light decks. It actually doesn't do anything without going into a light hero. So, because you need an opposing light hero to banish the card, and you need an opposing light hero to take a card from their soul. So, yeah, I mean, I think against those heroes, it's going to be good. So, I mean, this is a common instance, so I'm guessing this is presumably going to be a cycle as well. I mean, we don't know that for sure. I don't think, but, at yellow, if this is extra life, I mean, this could be quite relevant, right, in yellow and red into light decks, yeah?
Yeah, for some reason, my initial thoughts are that it might not be a cycle, but, I mean, we can even look back at the card we recently talked about, Ghostly Visit, right? Like, against a light hero, this is going to be a target to get that out of your graveyard and into your banish zone, so you're able to play it for that second, third, and maybe even fourth time. And at that, we just don't know the impact of banishing cards from Light Hero's soul, so it's still kind of to be determined on how powerful these cards are and disrupting that soul mechanic will be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we definitely don't actually know if it's a cycle so far, but it could be, and it could be quite strong, so we'll have to see. But yeah, I mean, purely just a sideboard card. We'll have to see if that has constructed applications as well. So the next card, another shadow action attack. So Mutated Mass, another blue as well. Costs 1. And so this is attack star and defense star at Majestic. So why is that? Well, the text says, you may play Mutated Mass from your banish zone. So another card we can play from banish there. And Mutated Mass's attack and defense are equal to twice the number of cards in your pitch zone with different costs. So if you have a card that costs 1, a card that costs 2, a card that costs 3, that's going to be 6 and 6 on the attack and defense. And this card also has Blood Debt. So again, you can play it from banish, but it does have that Blood Debt effect. Yeah, I mean, this is a lot of text on a card, Brendan. What are your sort of, I guess, thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean this card looks crazy at first. It's just how are we going to fuel that pitch zone? Because we're looking at potential 8 damage here, right? If we have a 0, 1, 2, and a 3 in the pitch zone. It's just how on our turn are we going to be able to fill that pitch when this costs 1? That's my question. What are your initial thoughts on how to do that? Is it going to be, you know, generic like non-attack actions with go again, or obviously attack actions with go again as well? I kind of see this in the potential Runeblade deck when I first think about it, right?
Yeah, it feels a lot more sort of Runebladey, go wide setup to me. I actually think this card has quite a high ceiling because in theory you could get this card well up over 10 attack with the right setup of cards. Is that is that actually that feasible? Maybe not, but this could be because it is blue. You can pitch it early and potentially set it up late game, either late game in your deck in your pitch order, or by getting into the banish for that blood debt effect. And if you have this setup turn where like you're saying, right, you go maybe Tome of the Arknight, maybe you play a Tome of Firendale with go again to fill your hand up and then pitch a few other cards with different costs. This could be a great way to end quite a wide Runeblade chain for like a Shadow Runeblade chain for like 8 attack or something. Like it has a high ceiling for 1 cost in a blue resource, but it's just how awkward is it in the early game, the fact that it's only going to defend for something if you also play an attack a defense reaction that costs something, or you pitch during the defense step, otherwise it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, and the defensive value is also really interesting, especially against something like Runeblade, which will be doing incremental rune chant damage as well as coming at you with physical damage, right? You can pitch to negate those rune chants, and by doing that, increase the defense value of this card, and then defend the big physical attack that's coming at you.
Yeah, it could be just it could be meta dependent as well, but I do feel like this card has quite a high ceiling. It's just whether people find the ways to build around it and whether it's actually viable and makes sense to set this kind of card up for the end game.
Great, and next card is none other than Levia Shadowborn Abomination, the Shadow Brute hero. So has 4 intellect, 40 health, and then 20 at young, so unlimited. And she reads, if a card with 6 or more has been put into your banished zone this turn, cards you own lose blood debt during the end phase. Shadow Brute hero. So our first talented hero in the Brute class. I know you're a big fan of Brute yourself, Hayden. So what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on this hero?
Yeah, I'm glad that we found out what the talent system meant. I think it was a little bit, like, wow, what does Shadow mean? Like, are these heroes going to be Shadow only? Are they going to be Shadow something or other? So yeah, now we know we have a Shadow Brute. It's interesting that we have another effect that her actual ability just affects not losing, basically, right? Like it's not something that adds extra advantage, like we see with Rhinar, who intimidates a card, or we see with Viserai, who creates runechant tokens from the ability. It just purely stops you from losing to your blood debt cards. So we know pretty much straight away that that's what Livia is all about: getting those blood debt cards in there, playing her big cards like Doomsday, whatever it is. I think already the cards we've seen, and we're going to go into a few of them, make a lot of sense with the ability, and you can kind of already see that there's a way to construct these decks both in probably limited and in constructed around 6 cost attacks and around filling your graveyard up. So yeah, I'm pumped to play this in constructed, to be honest, in classic constructed. Excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting to see that the hero ability is totally centered around blood debt evasion. I know we're still speculating on Shane, the Shadow Runeblade at this point, but I think that both Shadow heroes will have text that relates to evading that that blood debt cost. So stacking those cards in that banish zone, and then finding a way to not play the blood debt and not take 1, 2, 5 damage a turn.
Yeah, so you reckon? So both heroes you think will have this kind of evasion style ability?
Yeah, I think that will be... That's because if we read sort of the text that comes with a lot of these cards, they come on those kind of those banners, and they write a little bit of lore text. A lot of it talks about managing your blood debt, right? So the blood debt is another zone that you're able to utilize to have larger attacks, to have these crazy turns, but at the same time, being able to, while utilizing that zone, it's all about managing it, right? Not taking too much damage, avoiding the damage. And Levia's ability right here is just all that. If you do get that 6 or more put into your banish zone, then you don't pay the blood debt at all. So you could have 6, you could have 7, or even as little as 1 or 2 in there, but you're not going to pay the life cost.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think as well we have Shadow Instant that's a legendary specialization for Levia as well, which is interesting. So maybe we'll talk about that quickly. So Doomsday is, as I say, is a Shadow Instant. So not a Shadow Brute Instant, just a Shadow Instant, but it is legendary Levia specialization. So you can play one per deck, one in your deck, and it's blue. And it says play Doomsday only if there are 6 or more cards with Blood Debt in your banish zone. So exactly what Brendan was just talking about then. Create a Blasphemous the Soul Harvester token. So Brendan might know a little bit more than we do about this, but we're going to find out.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll just talk about this card. I might just do a little bit of speculation myself. As I said, I think that these tokens are going to be not so much around. I mean, the speculations could be replace your hero, could replace a weapon, could just be a summon. There's a lot that could be happening with this card, but we already know through Levi's ability that the Blood Debt management and the getting these cards in there is going to be so important if you want to be able to play this card. I don't know if you want to say anything on this, Brendan, or leave it.
Yeah, I can say a little bit, maybe just to get the hype up a little bit more, right? So yeah, it's absolutely crazy, right? Like the cost to play this card is so big. You're looking for 6 cards with Blood Debt in your banish zone. So if you don't dodge with Levia's ability, either because it's a whiff or whatever it may be, you're theoretically taking close to 6 damage, which is, that's a lot, right? So this Blasphemous token, like what can it be? To pay a cost this large to be a legend, to be a legendary card, we're shuffling in those juicy cold foils at this point. Like, how busted does Blasphemous have to be to make this worth it? And my thought, and obviously I'm privy to a little bit of knowledge, it's got to be the most crazy, game-changing, just busted card we've ever seen in our life. That, oh man, it's so good. It's so good.
It's got to be good. It has to. I mean, to warrant playing this card, you say like it's got to be good. So, Brendan, when are we going to find out what Blasphemous does?
So we will find out Sunday night. So I'm pretty sure it is. Let me think. I think it's 8 p.m. CST. So that's going to be Monday afternoon, Australian and New Zealand, and that will be spoiled on the Flesh and Blood TCG community Discord. So that pretty much what a lot of you probably know as the main one. It'll be spoiled up there, and we'll do a cool little event, something like, I don't know, I guess like the skies get dark and like we all have to do something to summon Blasphemous as an entire server.
I've already been worshipping out the back, so I'm ready.
Yeah. All right, so on to the next one. Probably either debatably the best name in Flesh and Blood or the worst, I guess, depending on your preference. So we have Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell. It's a red 2 cost at rare, so it could be a cycle as well. 0 attack and 3 defense, and it reads, as there's a text issue on this preview. Instead of saying as an additional cost, it says as, but going for it says, as an additional cost to play Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell, banish 3 random cards from your graveyard. If a card with 6 or more attack was banished this way, the next attack action card you play this turn gains +3 attack and dominate. And it has go again. So Hayden, the Brute expert, what are you thinking when you see Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell? And what do you think about the name first?
Oh, dude, I love the name. I'm a big fan of the name. This has to be the longest name we have, right, in Flesh and Blood so far. Characters
certainly.
I'm gonna have to go look it up.
Yeah, certainly. It's even the text is even smaller.
It's smaller, right? You have to scale down the text. I really like this card. I think again another end game card that seems really strong in the limited format. All 3 cycles I think are great. You can pitch the yellow and the blue early. It just defends for 3 as well, which is a premium in this format, to be honest. We don't have there's a lot of cards that don't defend for anything. But the actual ability on this is massive, right? So, the banish effect we know is a cost, so we have to fill up our graveyard to be able to pay for this. But to give a 6 or more attack card, if the card's banished this way, give an attack +3. So it's just any attack. It doesn't even have to be a Shadow Brute or a Brute attack. It's just any attack. So, you can play this on a card that has an on-hit effect. We know Brute doesn't have many on-hit effects, but there's other cards that have on-hit effects. You could, constructed, realistically play this on like a Command and Conquer or a Snatch if you really wanted to. So I think this card has a lot of ability to do some really cool things.
Yeah, this card is crazy, and I think that Hayden and I have both sort of agreed over this this early preview season that we've had so far that the Shadow Brute deck is going to be the biggest setup deck we've ever seen, right? Like these cards are absolutely like the power ceiling is absolutely insane, but how to get there is going to be very hard, very meticulous, and it's I think we're like as we progress in Flesh and Blood, especially in this what Monarch set is looking is looking to be. Some of these fundamentals in Flesh and Blood, like stacking your deck, managing your pitch, and obviously now going to be managing your banish zone in your graveyard, are just they're going to come to light a lot more. They're going to get their time in the spotlight per se. So yeah, this card is absolutely crazy. Like you said, in constructed, playing it on a command and conquer or it's a myriad of things will be absolutely devastating. But in limited, I mean, opening this card is just I can't even imagine.
All right, so for the next card, we have a Majestic. So Deep-Rooted Evil is a yellow Shadow Brute action attack. Costs 3. And it says, if a card with 6 or more attack has been put into your banish zone this turn, you may play Deep-Rooted Evil from your banish zone. It has 6 attack, 0 defense, and it has Blood Debt as well. So it's another Blood Debt card that you can play from banish, but it does have, it's got that sort of requirement to be able to play it out of banished. But we know that with Livia, we're already trying to fill up our banish with 6 cost cards. So we've got 2 cards that kind of, I think, work pretty well back to back together here with Convulsions into Deep-Rooted Evil. Yeah, I mean, this card to me is this might be the card I'm most excited about in the format, to be honest, so far that we've seen. For mostly the constructed implication, this repeatable effect that you can get. We talked about it before. Repeatable effect. From your banish zone that just has 6 attacks, so can trigger certain things. Has Blood Debt as well. Pitches for yellow, so even if you can't set this card up, you can still pitch it. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with this card.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally there with you. Very interested in the recursion in some of these cards and how that will affect constructive gameplay going forward. Obviously, I only mentioned constructive with this card because it is a Majestic, so you are unlikely to see it in limited. But yeah, how does this change the Brute deck? Now, since we've lost Drone of Brutality, being able to play this, like we mentioned with some of the other Blood deck cards that could be played out of banish zone multiple times in a game, how does that affect how fast you're going through your deck and how fast your opponent is at? Yeah, more significantly, how fast your opponent is expecting cards to block this.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking, right? Like, we know that LSS came out and said that the Drone of Brutality ban was really around that card breaking their design principles, that every card counts. And it's kind of interesting with this, right? You think, well, if you have these repeatable effects, does that kind of break the idea that every card counts? But this card has, you have to get it into your banish. And how do you do that? Well, you have to fill your graveyard up with cards. So you're using cards. You're basically making other cards be the cost to be able to play this card. So it's not like this card can just keep being looped over and over again. So yeah, you can play this. It requires, your opponent to either defend or take 6 damage. But in theory, to get this into your banish, it's probably cost you somewhere between, 3 to 4 cards, because of the card also being played to actually get those cards into banish. That's kind of how I see it anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the drone ban is making a lot more sense in the context of what we're seeing early out of Monarch.
100%. Yeah. Imagine these cards you just keep discarding and drone never actually goes into the discard, but it fills all these effects of draw and discard for, an attack with 6 or more. I'm sure, that's not the sole reason. There's probably other reasons that the set and drone might have been a bit, not fit with where it should be. Plus, the card was just good, right?
Yeah.
As Brendan has lots of experience with.
So moving on, we have Boneyard Marauder. It's a 1 cost at common. So the red one attacks for 6 and blocks for 3. So great vanilla stats on it. And Boneyard Marauder reads, as an additional cost to play Boneyard Marauder, banish 3 random cards from your graveyard. This card also has Blood Debt. So that means at the beginning of your end phase, if Boneyard Marauder is in your banish zone, lose 1 life. So this seems pretty vanilla for what we want to be doing in Shadow Brute.
Yeah, but definitely. But again, I think the first thing to point out is this has an additional cost of putting 3 cards from your graveyard into your banish, which is it is a cost. I think it's so important to remember that this is a cost. You can't play this card if you cannot fulfill that cost. So there's only so many of these cards you're actually going to be able to play, and you need ways to actually fill your graveyard up. I guess the good thing about this, especially in the context of limited, but also probably in constructed as well potentially, is that this card does defend for 3. So a lot of the cards we've seen so far with Brute, Shadow Brute, don't actually have a defensive value. So this one you can maybe you can't play it because you can't fulfill the cost, or you want to use those cards in graveyard for something else, go ahead and defend with this card. Get it in your grave. Keep filling up your grave. So I think this card's going to be, I mean, it kind of says it on the blurb of the card preview, right? A true staple with grave consequences. Like, that's what it's going to be, right? A staple.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. The next card we have is Dread Screamer, so another Shadow Brute action attack. Cost 2 at red for a common. So again, a cycle for this card. And it says, as an additional cost to play Dread Screamer, banish 3 random cards from your graveyard. So there again, we see that cost coming in. If a card with 6 or more attack is banished this way, Dread Screamer gets go again, or gains go again, and it has Blood Debt.
Yeah, so obviously Dread Screamer here. Like, once you do fill up that graveyard, this card is absolutely nuts, I think, in limited. Being able to swing for 6 and get go again. I know that in the context of some of the other brew cards we're seeing, it is a bit on par with, things like pulping now coming into the format. But yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine, because being able to swing for 6 and then have go again is just absolutely crazy, right? And obviously the red of a lot of these cards being the premium, having that six attack, so to fulfill either Levia's ability or any sort of six power discard that you want to hit. What are your thoughts, Hayden?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind is that you do need to have some resources in your deck, right? You have to be able to pay for these cards. So, the blue version of this, for instance, I think is just equally as relevant in the format, because you can pitch it to pay for stuff, you can defend for 3 with it, fill up your graveyard, or you can actually, if you get multiple blues in a hand, you can play that card, because if you're pretty likely to get go again, you come in for 4, but you have go again, so it does still has an effect, right? Like, it's still a relevant blue card in your deck. So I potentially, obviously red's a premium, as you say, but the yellow and the blue could be also good cards you want to pick up.
Yeah, it's funny evaluating these brew cards. I see all the red ones that attack for 6, and kind of our eyes pop a bit. But then you have to be able to cast all these 2-cost cards, which is you're gonna have to have those blues and those yellows in your deck. One thing to note about Dread Screamer as well is I think it has the most visceral art that we have ever seen in Flesh and Blood, where there's some sort of specter or kind of demon thing here, picking apart the brains of someone's being tortured.
Yeah, it's pretty. I would describe it as aggressive, I think. One thing about this card, though, I think, is this could see constructed play, not just in red. I actually think, we're just going back to that conversation about the resources and paying for cards. This is one where the blue card might actually be, a relevant blue you play. I know some, obviously we're talking about Shadow Brute here, but Brute decks in the past were paying things like Blue Pack Hunt or Blue Savage Feast. They're not 6 attacks. They don't have attack for 6, but they have relevant effects that if you need to play them, or you play them on a turn, they still do something. So Dread Screamer could be another one in that sort of camp.
Mm-hmm.
Deadwood Rumbler. So Deadwood Rumbler is a Shadow Brute action attack. So we're still with the Shadow Brutes. We see the red one here. It's common, so there is a cycle here. Cost 3. 8 attack at red. And the card says, draw a card, then discard a random card. If a card with 6 or more attack is discarded this way, banish a card from your graveyard. And it has Blood Debt and no defensive value. So another card we see here that doesn't have a defensive value. But pretty offset by the fact that this comes in for 8 attack for 3 and has a relevant effect, which is banish a card from a graveyard, which, you can do that to your opponent's graveyard or your graveyard. It doesn't specify.
Yeah, and the first card I think we've seen so far that has a targeted banish on the graveyard, not a random 3 cards or something like that. So getting that card you do want in that banish zone, it's going to have the most effect. And obviously, most likely this is going to be a very reliable card to trigger Levia's ability and dodge your Blood Debt.
Yep, definitely. And good to note as well that at red this is 8 attack, so yellow 7, blue 6. So the whole cycle, has 6 attack. I think that's pretty relevant, right?
Yeah, very relevant. I know we just talked about kind of having the resources to pay for some of these new brute cards because they are on the more expensive side. But yeah, I mean, what do you think about the downside of this card having no defensive value?
Yeah, it's pretty. So we just talked about, I think the downside basically is that we just talked about how good each cycle of this card is, but you can only play so many in your deck because they don't defend, right? So, how relevant is the blue card? You can still pitch it early on, but you can't defend with it. So it's same with the red card. You can't defend with this card. If you end up with too many cards in any given hand where you can't actually, they have no defensive value, your opponent is just kind of has free reign to just come in with consistent attacks and punish you for that.
Yeah, and this is actually a really great point because so back in Welcome to Wraith, we used to stack our decks. We would kind of counter pitch while our opponent was pitching to pitch good hands against their bad hands. So if you saw them pitch multiple block twos or maybe one E-Pot, maybe one potion, right? That was like your key is like, okay, now I'll set up my big turn to line up with that. There's going to be situations in your local sealed or even draft where you're going to see people push like 3 cards with no defensive value in a row. And like that's just going to be your key is like, okay, I'm just going to play for that and just win.
Yep, set up your find your dead rumbler. Have your eight attack here that goes into the hand they can only defend for 2 or 3. Super relevant.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be something to manage as you play these shadows classes. And what I assume the light class will have as well is that you're going to have to avoid pitching multiple cards that have 0 defense value to come up in the same hand, or a cognizant opponent will punish you for that.
Yep, agree.
All right, so next we have Soul Harvest. It costs 6, and it's a blue, and it's a rare, but a legendary Levia specialization. So first off, it has 6 attack and 3 block. So Soul Harvest reads here as an additional cost to play Soul Harvest. Banish 6 cards from your graveyard. It gains +1 for each card with Blood Debt banished this way. If Soul Harvest hits a hero, banish all cards from their soul. They lose life equal to the number of cards banished this way. So first off, legendary, so you can only have 1 in your deck, and it's at rare. So, I mean, that just gets me thinking first. And then +1 for, banishing 6 cards from your graveyard as an additional cost. So you have to have the 6. I mean, this looks like a game closer if I've ever seen one.
This is a bit of a signpost, right? Costs 6 as well. So, you can get potentially 12 attack out of this on the turn if you hit... hit those 6 cards with Blood Debt. And I mean, it feels like Soul Harvest might work for Doomsday, if you know what I mean. We've got a card in Soul Harvest that effectively just sets up Doomsday, right? So Soul Harvest, get those 6 Blood Debt cards into banish, play Doomsday straight away, and you're kind of off and running, right? We know Doomsday's an instant, so these 2 cards are definitely made for one another, which makes me think, what are we going to see with the 3 other classes? Are they going to have this kind of pairing of these 2 legendaries that work together to set each other up?
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I don't know if you've ever seen the meme with like Zach Galifianakis from the, I think it's from The Hangover. He's got all the math equations going past him. But like when I'm seeing these Shadow Brute cards, I'm just thinking about like these end game scenarios that you're going to have to craft in Limited. They're just going to be so complicated. Because like, I mean, the kind of the second paragraph on this, if Soul Harvest hits a hero, banish all cards from their soul, they lose life equal to the number of cards banished that way. So against the light here, right, they've pitched multiple cards that don't block at this point, and you've lined up your Soul Harvest to attack into that. I mean we're talking about 10 plus damage. It's absolutely ridiculous.
It's huge, yeah. And I think what we're starting to see more and more from, we saw it with even a little bit in Arcane Rising, then a lot with Crucible of War, is the importance of endgame and these cards that are really geared towards an endgame, right? I mean, you've got basically a 2-card combo here that sets up a massive endgame. We don't know exactly what the token does yet, but presumably it's powerful. And it's a lot of output over the course of a turn or 2. That's going to be really difficult for your opponent to defend. And then you've not only that, now with Soul Harvest, you've just set up your Banish Zone full of gas, right? Effectively, you've got your second hand ready to go. So it's huge. So moving on, we've got Endless Maw. So Endless Maw is a Shadow Brood action attack. Costs 3 for red, so it's at rare again. So presumably a cycle here. If a card with 6 or more attack is banished this way, Endless Maw gains +3. So sorry, it has an additional cost again of banishing 3 random cards from the graveyard. And if a card with 6 or more is banished, as we've seen with other cards, it has an effect. Endless Maws is get +3, and it has Blood Debt. So 3 cost at red for possibly a 9 attack that's huge. That return is massive.
Yeah, I assume hitting that additional cost is not going to be too hard in the Shadow Brute deck, especially if we're talking about constructed. But even in Limited, I mean, just 1 card with 6 or more attack, and your Endless Maws coming in for 9. This card also, like a lot of the cards that had this additional cost of banishing 3 random cards from your graveyard, it does block for 3. So drawing this in the early game, although not fantastic, you can always use it to block.
Yeah, definitely. And then what do you think through the cycles of this card? Do you think we'll see playability of the yellow, the blue as well?
Yeah, so the blue actually could be quite good, right? Because you're going to be coming in for 7, and that's just really a key number. So this could be this, unless Monk could actually be a very, very good resource card, in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah, excited to see it.
Awesome. And moving on, we have Shadow of Blasphemous. It's a 2-cost, red, that attacks for 6, and it's a majestic. It has no defense value. So, Shadow of Blasphemous reads, draw a card, then discard a random card. If a card with 6 or more attack is discarded this way, search your deck for a card with Blood Debt, banish it, then shuffle your deck. And Shadow of Blasphemous has Blood Debt as well.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Hayden?
We have a tutor, and we have, on an attack. So it's pretty relevant, right? Like 2 for 6 is already a good rate. Obviously, it doesn't defend. But the fact that, you do this, draw a card, then discard a random card effect isn't actually costing you a card overall, like we see with, Reinhard with the Brute original cards where, you have to, as an additional cost, discard a card at random. You actually get to draw a card as well. This is more reminiscent of the Skullhorn. And if it has 6 more attack, search for a card with Blood Debt. So you're filling that, another way to fill it up that banish. And because you get to go and choose the card, you can actually go and find something like, a Deep-Rooted Evil or something. These cards that then set you up for next turn. So this really strikes me as a great sort of early to mid-game card where you actually get to go and set up those, maybe repeatable effects or cards from Banish that, maybe you don't even want to draw them. Maybe there's something like the Mutated Mass where you don't want to draw that card. So a lot of ways to play Shadow of Blasphemous, I think, but the card is, I think, is very strong.
Yeah, all these allusions to Blasphemous are just getting me excited for that token, though.
Look at the art, right? Look at the background. Like there's a big old thing going on there. The villagers don't look impressed.
Oh yeah, I think that's Solana in the background, actually, like the city.
Oh yeah. So rounding out the Shadow Brute, we've got the equipment that we've now previewed as well, the common equipment. So Hooves of the Shadow Beast. Common equipment that says, when a card with 6 or more attack is put into your banish zone, you can destroy Hooves of the Shadow Beast, and if you do, you gain an action point. And it also has Battle Worn and Defense for 1, so you can defend for this card for 1, get the Battle Worn counter on it, you get the defensive value out of it, and then at some point, when you're trying to maybe set up these big turns or you've got multiple attacks in hand that you can actually utilize on a 4 or 5 card hand, you can pop this when a card with 6 or more is put into the banish zone.
Yeah, I mean, picking this up in limited and sealed, or even in draft. I mean, you're never going to be disappointed with that. Like getting that action point, as we've seen with these cards we've been talking about, it's just going to be huge. Stringing together those large turns.
This Who's the Shadow Beast. If I compare this to some of the equipment we saw in Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising, this feels like a step up, right? Like the effect on this card is pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like if you compare it to maybe something like a Snapdragon Scalers, which is obviously generic, so it could be played in all 4 of the classes in Welcome to Wraith, whereas this is class specific, but it has Battle Worn as well. So and most of your cards or a lot of the cards in the deck are going to be triggering this effect of putting a 6 or more into the banish.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, you can play something out of the banish with this, so you can play a card that banishes something, and then you can play a card out of banish afterwards if you get that action point. So it's pretty impactful, I think.
Yeah, and as we start to round out this brute class in the previews, like the level of endgame complexity, even in limited here, is just going to be pretty much unprecedented to what we've seen before, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm pretty hyped for it, to be honest. I think the limited format is just taking sort of steps and leaps and bounds to become this really in-depth, quite exciting format.
All right, and next we have our first weapon. It's going to be Ravenous Meat Axe. It's a brute weapon, axe, 2-hander, that swings for 3. It reads, once per turn action, 2 resources, attack. Whenever you attack with Ravenous Meat Axe, draw a card, then discard a random card. If a card with 6 or more attack is discarded this way, Ravenous Meat Axe gains +2 until end of turn.
I was just chuckling because I just love the names of these weapons so far. They're just so I don't know, just create these images in my mind of what these cards do. But I mean, so a weapon here for Brute that comes in for 3, cost 2. So face value, you go, oh, it's a lower rate than the Romping Club, but that effect is really big, right? First of all, it's helping you potentially just fill that Levier ability and stop that blood debt, by drawing a card and discarding a random card. Especially if you're actually setting it up. So if you're setting your deck up or the pitch up to be able to do that. And added on that, you then get to 5. So you're at where something like a Romping Club is with its own bonus, which is really important, right? It helps you to push damage while also actually triggering your hero's ability. I think this card's really strong.
Mm-hmm. And I forgot to mention as well, this is a token. So, yeah, I mean, we looked at a lot of cards that had an additional cost of banishing those 3 from graveyard, and we're like, okay, this would be quite bad to draw in the early game. But, I mean, Ravenous Meataxe is really going to fill up that graveyard for you, so you can play these cards that have the additional cost of, putting 3 from the graveyard into the banish zone. Yeah, I think it's just an enabler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really what it's. But an enabler that swings for 5 is, potentially for 5. That's a pretty good enabler. Like, sign me up for that. Not bad, eh? Cool. And the other thing to note is that this is a brute weapon. It's not a shadow brute weapon. So Rhinar, KO can play this if they did want to. If your deck was full of just 6 attack actions, this you draw and discard a beast villain, for instance. Get some value out of that.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see that constructed deck, but. Maybe it's possible, right? You can. I mean, swinging for 5 is definitely better than 4, but I just wonder how large the cost of thinning out your deck will be in that sense.
Definitely. And speaking of weapons, we have Hexagore the Death Hydra next, which is a Shadow Brute weapon, so specifically for the Shadow Brute class. And it says once per turn action, costs 2 resources to attack. Whenever you attack with Hexagore, it deals damage to you equal to 6 minus the number of cards with blood debt in your banish zone. So you're you're hitting yourself. Yeah. What do you think about this card, Brendan?
Yeah, so one thing to note, this one is at Majestic, so we're likely not going to see this in the limited format too much. But I mean, this card is going to be absolutely crazy, right? So let's say you can consistently dodge the blood debt. You're triggering Levia's ability. You're not taking that damage. So let's say you're able to manage 5 cards for maybe 4 and maybe even 6 cards in your blood debt zone. I mean, you're paying 2 to swing for 6. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and also I just realized the Shadow Brute weapon it's not a hammer, it's not a claw, it's not a club, it's a flail. I hadn't seen that before.
Yeah, it brings me back to that mechanologist weapon that was introduced in Crucible.
The plasma.
What did they call it?
Plasma barrel shot?
Yeah, but the weapon type, what is it?
Oh, shotgun?
It's something weird, right? It was like something super weird.
I think it's shotgun. Yeah. I love that card. It's one of my favorite cards. It might be I think it's my top 3 favorite weapons.
Yeah. I just remember laughing about the weapon type with a friend when it came out because it just like totally didn't make sense because you would expect it to be like gun, right? Or like, yeah, but it wasn't.
Oh, it is. Rifle. It's totally just gun. It's mechanologist.
It's gun. Okay, so that's the funny part. Gun. So like, it wasn't rifle. It's just gun.
That's just gun.
There's something. Just brings me back to that card. But transitioning, getting a little bit off topic, I think we have one of the craziest brute cards I've ever seen, and it's not a Shadow Brute card. This is going to be Pulping. It's red at rare, so a cycle, and costs 2. It has 6 attack and no defense, and it's a brute action attack. So you can play this in Rhinar, you can play this in KO, and obviously you can play this in Leva as well. And Pulping reads, draw a card, then discard a random card. If a card with 6 or more is discarded this way, Pulping gains Dominate. So dominates. That means they can only block with 1 card from hand, right? The second paragraph. While Pulping is defended by less than 2 non-equipment cards, it gets Go Again. So this card is ideally getting Go Again every time you play it unless they have a defense reaction in Arsenal, right?
Yep, exactly that. Yeah, and there's a lot of text on this card, right, in terms of what it does. The fact that it's a brute action, not a shadow brute, as you say, means it can be played in Rhinar. This is actually the first card I think we saw previewed spoiled that had no defense value, an attack that had no defense value, which was pretty interesting. Since then, obviously, we've seen more. I think this is going to see play constructed. I mean, the fact that you can play this, force Go Again, helps with these sort of 5-card hands potential. And the fact that, again, draw a card, discard a random card, it fills your graveyard for the for the Shadow Brute fulfillments of cost. There's so much to like about this card. It has a lot of versatility, I think. I would describe it as like a role player, right? Like it does so much.
Yeah, and I think that there's like almost no doubt that he's constructed play. It's just a question of do you side it out against matches like Warrior or something like that,
Katsu,
where you are gonna, yeah, where you're gonna value blocking because of hit triggers. But I mean, this card is absolutely ridiculous, especially if you're able to have the resources to pay for what's coming after it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but to take it back, right? Like, if you can't give this card go again, so say they can defend with 2 non-equipment cards because they have defense reaction in Arsenal, are you as excited about it then?
Am I?
Yeah, like, do you think it's as
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm getting 2 cards and I'm clearing their arsenal, right? For 2 costs, it seems pretty good to me.
Yeah, I think the threat of this card is a weapon. So if you say you pitch a blue, you come in with pulping, and then you have, like tunic counter up +1 resource floating. Your opponent is kind of priced into throwing those 2 cards, or let you come in for 5 afterwards, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then tear limb from limb. So I mean, this this card is nuts. So it's a blue brute action at Majestic. So no cycle. Cost 2 for a brute action. Says draw a card, then discard a random card. If a card with 6 or more attack is discarded this way, the next brute attack action card you play this turn gains +X attack, where X is the base attack of that card, and has go again, of course. So this is, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is that this card is absolutely nuts with KO, right? You double the base value of your, let's say, Predatory Assault that has Dominate for 12, then it gets +12 to 24. It's the first thing that pops into my head.
I'm sure people are gonna love getting that done, like playing against that in Blitz when someone pulls out that. Yeah, I mean, this is just pulling us back over and over again to Monarch is introducing. It's just, I wouldn't say introducing, but highlighting these aspects of Flesh and Blood that we've actually kind of been able to ignore until now. Like Flesh and Blood there's always been, pitching and setting up turns and tracking and things like that. But with cards like this, I mean, you're just looking at a much more complicated game that's going to reward just a significantly higher skill ceiling.
Yeah. It's again worth noting this card doesn't defend, so it is, there's a cost to this card. You can't just throw it away if you need to. Like, you do need to set and pitch this card. But I know this was the preview from Session Blood, so if you want to hear a bit more in depth on that, I know Carol really goes into this card. I'd recommend going and checking out their episode on this.
Yep, and so up next we're going to look at the first Runeblade card, and
go.
it's actually not going to be a Shadow Runeblade card. So it's just Runeblade action attack. That's going to be Vexing Malice. It costs 1, it attacks for 3 and blocks for 3, and then the text says deal 2 damage to target hero. This is a rare, so likely a cycle, but Hayden, deal 2 damage to arcane to target hero. That doesn't sound very Runeblade to me.
No, this sounds a lot more wizardy, doesn't it? So I guess we've seen the first, it's kind of almost signposting maybe that Runeblade in the set isn't going to be about the Runechant tokens. It's just going to be about straight up dealing arcane damage to a target hero. So I think there's a few things. I mean, the first thing I thought, and I had to check this, clarify, I got really excited that on-hit effects weren't just physical damage. So that this could trigger something like a Mover in Skies. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. It is physical damage for on-hit effects. But, the fact that, say there's a few more cards like this that deal more than 1 arcane damage, like Vexing Malice. If you go, in Constructed, if you're sitting there going, okay, I'm playing against a Runeblade, am I now playing 1 Null Rune equipment? Am I playing 2 Null Rune equipment? Like, where am I playing to try and potentially play around the cards they have?
Huge, right? If we think about like Consuming Volition or Dread Triptych, these cards that if the opponent has taken arcane damage before this card is played, they have significant effects. Like playing this card and giving it go again somehow, and then playing Consuming Volition just seems crazy in an aggro Runeblade deck.
Yeah, if you can give it go again. Yeah, I mean, on rate, right? This is 1 for 5 that defends for 3. Like, the on rate on this seems really, really good. But it is split across 2, so it's like how good will it be? I mean, by itself, it actually seems at best because it's split 2 sources of damage. Whereas maybe if you're chaining cards together, so this has go again for whatever reason, whether it's Mover in Skies or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
You come for 3, they can block with a card from hand, pitch to defend the 2 damage potentially, and then still have a resource up for your next. So I actually like this as just just 1 card by itself. I think is where it's going to have its most impact.
Yeah, it's totally format warping in the sense of taking 2 damage. Like the 2 damage here, where like every single time we played against Runeblade, on the other side of the table of Runeblade, to be more specific there, you've always just put in your one null rune, whether it's the hood, the gloves, and that's it, and that covers everything. You just have to be able to pitch to block after that. But now, that doesn't work anymore. And there are cards in Runeblade that if you have taken arcane damage before they're played, they have very, very significant effects that may make you discard a card, that may generate another rune chant, so I mean, this is totally game changing. I know it looks a bit vanilla at first, just being a Runeblade card, but I mean, this card is crazy.
Yeah, and I think because the fact that the yellow and the blue also have that arcane damage impact as well, so presumably yellow will be 2 attack, blue 1 attack, but we'll still say deal 2 arcane damage. So yeah. And then we have our first token of the set, Soul Shackle. So Soul Shackle says at the beginning of your action phase, banish the top card of your deck. And it's a Shadow Runeblade token aura. So auras stay in the arena. This card, as far as we know right now, there's no way to get rid of this card. This token just stays in play.
Yep. Well, it seems like a bit of a signpost, right? Like with this card, we're going to be able to fuel our banish zones, so fuel our blood debt. But like, what is the downside of that? What is the downside of playing maybe a game gets drawn out a little longer than you want, but every single turn you're banishing a card off the top of your deck, and we don't know if there's any way to remove this. So I mean, I think that our first thought would be this stays, and it doesn't go away. And ideally, it's a good thing, right? Like you're getting the cards in the banish zone, you're playing them out, things like Ghostly Visit or et cetera, and getting that blood debt stacked up. But milling a card every turn, how significant will that be?
It's like twofold, right? Yeah, you're milling a card, but you're also putting it into your banish zone. So if it's blood debt,
exactly, yeah.
Are you going to be stacking up too much blood debt that you can't actually pay for? Like
yeah, right. Yeah, right. Like what? It just you can't stop it. It just keeps coming. And then like we don't know I assume that the Runeblade will have evasion from its blood debt, just like Levia does, the Shadow Brute. But how easy is that going to be to turn on? And is this card really going to bite you in the butt sometimes?
I'm not even convinced that the hero has inbuilt evasion. I actually think it could come from cards, Runeblade, Shadow Runeblade cards. I'm not sure. So we'll see what happens. We don't even know what card makes Soul Shackle. So I'm sure we're going to find out though.
Yeah. So next we have another token weapon. So this is going to be Galaxy Black. It swings for 1 and has 0 defense, obviously because it's a weapon, but it's a Shadow Runeblade weapon, and it's a sword 2-hander. And it says, once per turn action, 1 resource, attack. If you have played a card from your banish zone this turn, Galaxy Black gains +2 until end of turn. That would bring it up to 3. If Galaxy Black hits a hero, deal 1 arcane damage to that hero.
There's a lot
there's a lot to there's a lot to there's a lot. I was about to say there's a lot to unpack. Just take us through it, Hayden.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing is it's a 1 attack. So face value, if nothing else has happened this turn, you can pay 1, come in for 1. If it hits, they take a damage, right? They take an arcane damage. So face value, this is presenting 2 damage, right, without anything else happening. So 1 for 2 feels, pretty medium, but not the worst thing. And then the next thing is that if you've played a card from your banish this turn, it gets +2. So at that point, now you're threatening, basically a Dawnblade rate, right? One resource for attack for 3. And if it hits, it deals extra damage. So actually at that point, if they defend with a card for 3, they're effectively stopping 4 damage that you're trying to present with this, which is interesting. I'm not so sure about this card. I feel like I need to see... There's clearly going to be some stuff with Runeblade where if you've dealt arcane damage to a hero, you get an effect, right? I feel like there's going to be cards that do that. Just the amount of stuff that is just, sending these little pings of arcane damage to add up.
Yep, and I'm actually as anticlimactic as it is, I'm on the same page as you. I think we don't have enough context to evaluate Galaxy Black. At face value, right? Like we're not looking at anything that's as crazy as what we saw with the Brute weapon, because obviously we have the context of the Brute as well. But I think that this is going to be one of those that we're going to have to come back to after we see the rest of the Runeblade cards. One
thing that does go through my mind actually is now thinking about it. That evasion you spoke about with Levia and how you trigger her ability is obviously the 6 attack cards. Could it be that our Shadow Runeblade, the way that you trigger that evasion is you have to deal arcane damage to a hero that turn?
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see that.
Saying it could be the way that it goes.
Yeah.
I mean, by the time this pod drops, to be honest, this afternoon, it could already be out, and we might look a little bit silly. But maybe we'll look like geniuses. I don't know. So moving on, we've got 2 equipment. So we've got Aether Ironweave, which is a Runeblade equipment chest piece. Defense for 1, and the card says action, destroy Aether Ironweave, gain 2 resources. And you can only activate this ability if you've played an attack action card and a non-attack action card from Banish this turn. No, not from Banish, just played an attack and a non-attack action this turn. And it has Go again. But you can play those from Banish, presumably. So if you've got some cards set up there and Banish, this would help. And it has Battle Warm, so you can obviously defend with it, and then use that activated ability.
Yeah, I mean it's fantastic, right? You're gonna want this in your Shadow Runeblade deck, no matter what the cards look like, no matter what the hero looks like. This is gonna be kind of your your basic signpost armor that you're gonna want to early pick or anything like that. And the Battle Worn 2 is obviously very significant. But yeah, gaining 2 resources for playing those, that non-attack action and attack action, something you probably already want to do when you're playing Shadow Runeblade. Yeah, it's a serious amount of resources in my opinion.
Yeah, 2's huge. I mean, it does require a little bit of setup. I keep kind of comparing some of these cards to other cards, but something like Hardened Cross Trap or Vest of the First Fist, I think is a reasonable comparison in terms of its effect. Those cards are both pretty powerful equipment effects in their sets. This one does have a bit more, I guess. You have to fulfill a criteria to get the 2 resources.
But defense for 1.
Defense for 1, and I just feel like the cards we're seeing so far out of Runeblade, there's going to be Go Again on these cards, and we saw it in the previous set, right? So many of the attack and non-attack actions had Go Again, so it doesn't feel impossible. And another card that just says, hey, play a couple of cards, get more resources, and play more cards. Again, another in-game sort of state.
Yep. Yeah, well, moving on to the last card we're going to be talking about, it's Ebonfold. It's a Shadow equipment head. So Shadow equipment, right? So Shadow Brute and then Shadow Runeblade, which we assume are the only 2 Shadow classes in this set. And it's going to be a common. So it says instant, 1 resource, destroy Ebonfold. Banish a card from your hand. If it's a Shadow card, draw a card. A bit of filtering there. And then it says Spell Void 2. If your hero would be dealt arcane damage, you may destroy Ebonfold instead. If you do, prevent 2 arcane damage that source would deal. Seems like that kind of relates directly to Vexing Malice, huh?
I mean, it's exactly the right amount, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and that's again why I think that we might see that evasion ability be triggered off arcane damage. Here's a way to actually prevent that from happening. First time we've seen Spell Void. Interested to see where else we might see Spell Void. Could we see it on some permanent cards or even a keyword on instance? Yeah, so a key, this doesn't defend for anything. So I often think that when equipment don't defend for anything, you've got to look at the ability, and it's probably quite strong ability. I mean, we see that in Welcome to Wraith with Hardened Cross Trap and the Scalers being 2 very powerful equipment that both don't defend. They have no defensive value. And I feel like that with the Ebonfold as well. The fact that this can be used in Levia to trigger that ability with the first instant effect, banish a card, plus fill up your banish zone with a really relevant card. The other thing you can look at, actually, just one of the things I've been thinking about through the previous season is banish in some regards can be used as like an extra arsenal slot for some cards, right? Some cards you can just play from banish. They have no other requirement to be played with them other than blood debt, so you could lose a life on the turn that you put it there. But that's a great way to set up future turns as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the ability we see here is fantastic. Like banishing a card from your hand, so you get to pick the card, and then if it's a Shadow card, you draw a card, so you essentially replace that card that was banished. Obviously, you will sink the 1 resource here, but I assume that this effect will be very, very strong.
Yeah, and it's instant, right? And then I think the other thing to say about Spell Void is that it doesn't cost any resources, right? Like, this is just effectively gain 2 life in a lot of situations, plus stop a potential effect.
Totally agree with you. All right, everyone, that is the conclusion of our first week of spoilers and our first week of Arsenal Pass at the same time. So, super interesting set. Obviously, these mechanics are just totally groundbreaking, totally new. I know we're also trying to wrap our mind around, what we've already got and what's to come. But, Hayden, what is kind of your aggregate thoughts on the set so far?
Yeah, my kind of big takeaways, I guess, from week 1 of previews is Monarch really has this feel about the end game, be it limited or constructed, that it's, the pitch setup, the use of the banish, the resources available to you, your deck and your life are so important, and how you manage those resources to get through the early game, to the mid game, and to this end game. And I think we're just going to continue to see that over the next couple of weeks with obviously the light cards come through, the light classes. But yeah, I guess my other takeaway is that I'm just super happy that we can see another Brute and a take on Brute with the Shadow talent. That's kind of what I'm most keen for in this format. I'm definitely going to start my brewing process over this weekend, I think.
Yep, super excited for Brute myself, and I love the theme of the cards. Like, I love the Blood Debt, the Evasion, all of this. But I'm going to echo what you say. I think Flesh and Blood is about to get a lot more complicated. I think we'll look back in a couple months here, and Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising will just look like child's play. Like, we already looked back on Welcome to Wraith, and some of the aspects of the formats we were playing early constructed are just really basic compared to what we have now, right? So I think this emphasis on the pitch system and setting up and these cards that don't block is only going to just bring that more into fruition and really force people to play all aspects of Flesh and Blood.
Yep, completely agree.
Yeah, and as we close out, just want to quickly plug a few things. We are going to be spoiling Blasphemet on the Flesh and Blood TCG community server on Sunday night for us in the US or just North America in general, and that will be Monday kind of early morning, afternoon for all of you in New Zealand and Australia. So stay tuned for that card. I can promise you it does live up to the hype. And then, and that, I know I just mentioned the spoiler on Sunday before I mentioned the spoiler on Saturday. So Saturday, North American time, and again, early morning, mid-afternoon, New Zealand, Australian, we are going to be spoiling a card on Fab Gauntlet. This is a tournament that we run weekly through the Discord and streamed at twitch.tv/Fab Discord. And we will have another spoiler on that day, and it might give us some more clues on Shadow Runeblade. That's going to be my little hint, but definitely a really fun one, and I think you guys will like the card a lot.
Yeah. And if you haven't checked out already, our preview card for Arsenal Pass went up just before this pod dropped, actually, so that's on YouTube as well. Be sure to check that out. That's Dimensional Crossroads, which we didn't talk about in this pod, but we talk about it in that 10-minute video.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.